क्या So, hello, welcome to this meditation and talk. So tonight, I want to talk about the problem of victimhood and of being the victim, or of classifying people as victims. So, I was walking down a street in Bristol called Stokes Croft the other day. It's a road that runs more or less due north from the centre. It was Derek Ferguson who first noted that on a map of Bristol, it could well represent the Sushumna Nadi of the city. And ironically, or perhaps just because of this, for a long time it's been one of the shabbiest and most neglected parts of Bristol, popular with disgruntled bohemians and grungy alcoholics. Anyway, I was noting the amount of pro-Palestinian street art that's gone up there in the last few weeks. And I was finding it impossible to imagine any pro-Israeli street art in its place or even alongside it. So that's my starting point for tonight. Why is it that so many people, especially young people in the West, are drawn to the Palestinians as opposed to the Israelis? Or instead of being equally drawn to the problems of both peoples, why is it that they seem as a majority to take part of the Palestinians against the Israelis? A murderer is not allowed to plead that his victim was rich and oppressing him. So why should a nation be allowed to? This is what Merlin says in The Once and Future King. If you know that book, it's about King Arthur, written by T.H. White, for children, but it's equally readable for adults. And the first part is called The Sword and the Stone. So that's what he says, and that's certainly my feeling about what Hamas did to Israel on October the 7th. A murderer is not allowed to plead that his victim was rich and oppressing him, so why should a nation be allowed to? But it astonishes me how many people are happy to excuse what Hamas did, or at least to overlook it, to brush it to the side a little, in the process of identifying themselves with the Palestinian cause, basically because they see the Israelis as the oppressors and the Palestinians as the oppressed. They see the Palestinians as being fundamentally in the right and the Israelis as being fundamentally in the wrong, even to the extent that they would feel it to be a satisfactory outcome if the Jews were left without a homeland at all, which of course is what Hamas wants. So we have academics like Raz Segal, himself an Israeli, asserting that what Hamas did on October the 7th was nothing like the Holocaust because under the Nazis, quote, powerless Jews were being murdered by one of the most powerful states and armies, whereas what was happening this time was that a very powerful state was being attacked by Palestinians who have for decades suffered under Israel's settler colonial rule. The implication is that it was completely understandable, and there are very thin lines between the understandable and the justifiable, and between the justifiable and the necessary. Meanwhile, the BBC's highest paid broadcaster was urging his millions of social media followers to watch the interview in which this was being argued. But I don't really want to talk about the political situation as such. I don't have any axe to grind. What I'm concerned with tonight is the mysterious appeal of this idea of the oppressed, the victim. But if we do look at the politics of the matter, if we try to go into the historical facts of the case, which I suppose we have to do to some extent, then it's actually not that easy to say who are the oppressors and whom the oppressed. Who really owns this land, if anybody can be said to own it? Is there a straight answer to that? No. We could take it back to 1948 when the British Mandate ended and the Zionists declared the existence of the State of Israel. We should certainly note that at that time some 700,000 Palestinian Arabs were displaced from this new nation state. However, we should also note that even more Jews, maybe as many as 1 million, were displaced from Arab countries at the same time. We could ask why there can't be a two-state solution, with Palestine established as one state and Israel as another. In theory, that sounds as if it should be straightforward, but in reality, it has proved to be anything but. And it would seem that the Palestinians have been more intractable on this issue than the Israelis, mainly because they haven't wanted to give up their claim to the land occupied by Israel. Then comes the awkward question as to why Arab states have not come rushing to the rescue of Gaza. In fact, for a long time, Egypt, together with Israel and with the approval of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, not Hamas, has blockaded Gaza. Why? For that matter, why did the Jordanian army throw the Palestinian Fedayeen out of Jordan in 1971? And what happened when, as a result, Palestinian insurgents relocated to Lebanon? 15 years of civil war. Why were 200,000 Palestinians thrown out of Kuwait in 1 week in 1991? Because of the PLO's support for the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait is the answer. And what about the many Palestinian acts of terror, Black September gangs outrages, the firing of rockets at random into Israeli territory, and so on? In short, the whole subject is extremely complex. It's not a simple case of right against wrong, and we could argue the ins and outs of it forever. What we are concerned with here, though, is why it has long been considered the virtuous thing to do to support the Palestinian cause, to globalize the Intifada, or chant from the river to the sea, and so forth. Why do so many people who like to proclaim their concern with making a better world, people we might assume would be seekers, why do they come down squarely on the side of the Palestinians? In The Pearl of Wisdom, I argue that the modern ego, in its self-appointed, self-righteous, progressive form, allots 4 roles to people. It doesn't necessarily do this all the time, but whenever some political issue or social issue comes up, ding, out come these 4 roles. The first 2 roles are the good agent and the bad agent. The agents are the ones who have agency, as it's called, that is, the ability to act freely. The good agents, the ones who are allotting these roles in the first place, like to think of themselves as activists. They talk about the arc of history and see themselves as bending it in the right direction. In other words, they think they know how we should evolve, and they believe that they are the ones to bring this evolution about. They are progressives. They have been called the new elite. That doesn't necessarily mean that they have the top jobs and highest incomes. Not at all. In fact, some of them may be just getting by in a middle-class way. But what it does mean is that they have a great deal of influence over the way our culture operates. There are plenty of them in the higher ranks of the civil service. They run the universities. They are the humanities lecturers, the museum curators, the managers of art projects, the people who commission plays, who publish books, who run the BBC, who control the advertising agencies, who control what kinds of buildings are built, and so on. They are the cultural gatekeepers. Of course, that's a sweeping statement, and there are always exceptions, but in general, there's a lot of truth in this. They all tend to think alike on most issues, although they would be the first to call themselves free-thinking individuals. So they're the good agents. Then come the bad agents, the oppressors. They too have this agency, this ability to act freely, but they use it to do bad things, according to the good agents. In the current context, the Israelis fit this template of the oppressors, the bad agents, far more easily than do the Palestinians. And it's interesting to see why. They have more firepower, more wealth, more success. They are go-getters, they are competent. They've taken responsibility for themselves. Many Jews across the world have achieved high positions in cultural and intellectual pursuits out of all proportion to their numbers, and so on. When asked what Israelis should do to make themselves more popular, Thomas Sowell gave a simple one-word answer: fail. They should fail. Then maybe they too could be seen as vulnerable, as victims. Because the victim is the third of the 4 roles I'm talking about. The victims are the vulnerable people on whose behalf the good agents are making the world a better place, supposedly. Almost any group can be described as vulnerable, as victims, if it can be perceived as being oppressed in some way. For a long time, this role was mainly accorded to the working class, seen as being victimized by the ruling class. But we hear much less about that these days. The old idea of the class war having to a large extent been replaced by identity politics. The good agents need the vulnerable, they need the victims, because by working on their behalf, or speaking on their behalf, or merely thinking and feeling on their behalf, they are the anointed ones who are slowly but surely changing the world. The vulnerable may be classed as such for one reason or another, because they are children, because they are adolescents, because of their color, because of their poverty, because of their subordinate social status, because of their LGBTQ proclivities, because of their mental or physical health issues, or because they are women oppressed by the patriarchy. But ultimately, it is because of their perceived lack of agency that they are defined as vulnerable. In the Palestinian conflict, the Palestinians are definitely seen, by and large, as the victims, the oppressed, and therefore as essentially the good guys, regardless of what Hamas might have done. Actually, Hamas, which is an acronym for Islamic Resistance Movement, contains in its very name this notion of the victim, the underdog, the one who is resisting, who is rebelling against an oppressive power. Hamas has been described, correctly I think, as at heart a radical Islamist death cult, which indoctrinates children with the hatred of Israelis and with the aim of the extinction of Israel, and that this is considered more important even than death itself. Hamas has certainly used and defended the use of suicide attacks, and indirectly its most recent massacre of Israelis was a suicide attack, in that Israel's response, the devastation of Gaza, resulting deaths of civilians, was entirely predictable, perhaps even welcomed in a kind of perverse way, in that it could be used as leverage to bring global political pressure on Israel, or to lead to a wider war in the region, or to delay the signing of these Abraham Accords of peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia and so on. Suicide is the ultimate expression of the person who accepts the role of the victim. Of course, I'm not trying to say that no one is ever a victim, but when we talk about victims, we can say that there are particular victims and general ones. I mean, one can be a particular victim in a particular instance, as I am now. I'm the victim of a media company which has basically stolen my money, and I'm trying to get it back. But I don't see myself as a victim in general, a permanent victim across the board. I don't accept the role of the victim as a general characteristic of my position in life. There's a strange contradiction here, actually, that individually, people may want to say, and often you hear them saying, putting it on social media, I am empowering myself, I have agency, etc. But they may still want to use their group identity of a victimized community or ethnicity if they feel it's useful to them, either to protect themselves from criticism or to get something they want. For example, these days, people will happily, if angry, talk about having had ancestors who were enslaved and were therefore victims, as though they also are victims by proxy or victims by extension, and that this is a great achievement for which they themselves, the descendants of the original victims, ought to be paid a hefty sum. This is so strange. For one thing, we are surely all descendants of slaves, given that slavery was so widespread in the ancient world, and not only in the ancient world, but until comparatively recent. But for another, and this is the point, there is no virtue per se, as such, in being a slave. It is not an achievement. It's not a good thing from any point of view to be oppressed or to account oneself oppressed. To be a person who receives, and not only receives, but to some extent accepts aggression and oppression and victimhood, is more or less the definition of a left-sided person, a person who is too left-sided. This kind of left-sidedness is actually an inverted oppression, such as we see in beggars who sit there looking very oppressed, yet daring us not to feel guilty, not to feel sympathetic to their hard lot. The ego explodes, the superego implodes, or so it seems to me. With its aggression and oppression, the ego projects outwards, leans on us, squeezes us, sits on our head. But the superego implodes, creating a vacuum which sucks our attention into it. Overly left-sided people suck sympathy from us. And there's no resolution to this. There's never any end to the problem or to the amount of sympathy to be extracted from us if we go about things in that way. The beggar who sits on the bridge into town where I often pass and asks for money today will be there again tomorrow asking for more money. Now, it's difficult to say these things without sounding hard, without sounding so unsympathetic, such a cold fish, which brings us to our fourth and final role, the judgmentalist. The judgmentalist is someone who, according to the good agent, the representative of the progressive ego, according to him, the judgmentalist simply regurgitates the oppressor's view of things, the view against which the good agent is rebelling. The judgmentalist may not be an oppressor as such, he may not have any power, but he aids and oppresses the oppressor. The judgmentalist simply will not accept the consecrated view of the good agent, the anointed one. He's not a critical thinker, according to the agent. In fact, he can be even worse than the oppressor, because the oppressor is caught up in a kind of double bind with the oppressed, and maybe there's some excuse for what he does, an unhappy child or something. But the judgmentalist has no such excuse. Also, and it's an important point, the oppressor is out of reach as far as the good agent is concerned. In the current Gaza conflict, the agent may protest all he likes, this kind of ego, this cool ego guy, and post on social media and march to Trafalgar Square and whatever. But the Israeli government is not going to pay a blind bit of notice. The judgmentalist, on the other hand, is much more approachable. He may be someone the agent knows personally. He may be a member of his own family or in the same WhatsApp group. This makes the agent's antipathy towards the judgmentalist more personal. It can be really quite bitter. So, to draw this to a close, I feel that behind the good agent's need to assert himself, to show himself to be a virtuous person on the right side of history, there's a lot of guilt. He can sound very definite about something like Palestine because it's distant from him. It's not actually personal to him in most cases. And he wants to be definite. He wants to be sure he's right about something, that he is on the right side of the good activists. But he's not. Maybe he should listen to people like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who was brought up being indoctrinated with the desire to wipe out the Jews, and who has really learned a great deal. It's giving us a very sound message about this. In any case, we have to go beyond all this. Sympathy is not compassion. It doesn't solve anything, as we know. And if we merely get angry about the situation, whichever side we take, I mean, whether we take the Israeli side or the Palestinian side, we won't be acting as Sahaja Yogis, but just as ordinary, unrealized people. As Mother says, such people, their prayers don't reach God because they haven't established a connection with Him. So, we are neither good agents nor bad agents, neither victims nor judgmentalists. We don't accept these roles. We are beyond. And so I'd like to ask Priti now to play part of a great talk by Sri Mataji. Mainly here she's talking about the guilt part of it. And the sound quality isn't particularly good, but there are subtitles. And it's about 7 minutes.
If you came for the first time tonight to one of our programs,
because money and all these concepts are your own. He didn't make this world to get any fruits out of it. Nothing. He just made it because he loved. He wanted to express his love, just to manifest that love, he made this world. There's nothing else expected. And to put the human mind at that level is an impossibility, I find, in the beginning. But gradually they start understanding how forgiving he is, how kind he is, how nice. So the first problem I faced in the West always, even in palaces, was the problem that I faced was that human beings feel guilty. And this guilt is such a big problem in the West. I just don't understand. See, why do we feel guilty so much? And that is one of the hurdles of Sahaja Yoga. I've seen that people start feeling guilty. To such an extent that they don't believe that they can get realization. They think they are sinners, born outright, permanently, branded as sinners, and they can never get their realization. I mean, just the brand. It's beyond self-pity also. I would say it's even self-destructive. Today I have taken up the subject of left Vishuddhi because I felt that I must one day speak on this subject, that this is absolutely not intelligible to God that you are guilty for what? Guilty for what are you? If you ask yourself, you say, oh, we are guilty because we crucified Christ at the most. That is the maximum guilt a human being can say on his head. We crucified Christ, we tortured all the saints. Right? But by being guilty, what do you get? Do you get him back? Can you go back and correct that situation? But harping upon that, you do get into a subconscious mind. You get into a position where you are no more normal to see the love of God. You recede into a corner of your mind which is darkness, which is ignorance, which is blindness, where you cannot receive that beautiful rain, that eternal flow that's coming in. You hide yourself at the back and then you say, what about the sun? I cannot receive because I don't deserve it. Behind all this ego orientation in the West, oh, I wish they were purely egoistical. They're not. All this ego recedes back into that little pouch, what we call the guilt. You say something to someone, it's not saying that point, that stage, that I've said it. All right, I've said it and I take the responsibility. It's good. No. But you come back home and, oh, I should not have said that. So you wobble between one kind of action into another kind, from, say, into an aggressive to the another one of a recipient. And this wobbling really is very, very troublesome. It can go on too much. The oscillation could be so much that it can make you absolutely frantic, diffident, and sometimes useless. On the contrary, God wants to find human beings who are cheerful people, who are happy people, who are thankful to Him for His blessings. The most unhappy animal in this world is the human being. Can you believe it? Animals don't know happiness and unhappiness. Also a good point. But the most unhappy human being and the most complicated human being has become so over self-destructive that a destruction force is built in it. Now think of that force that has built you up into a human. How with care and love, without your knowledge, without troubling. Even when you were born, you never knew what was the pain of the birth. Your mother took over. He's made you a human being. So carefully, delicately built you up. For what? What is the fruit of this beautiful flower? Why the flower starts eating itself? Have you ever heard of anyone like that? This is the worst disease with which we in the West suffer. French, yes, we had at least double the number of people that we have here today, surprisingly. But all of them had the same problem. And I think all their psychologists, psychoanalysts, we can say all the books, all the writers, the philosophers, everyone has done to them. They have given these ideas and everybody accepts them. And they trust themselves morning till evening, walking with so many wrinkles on the forehead. And you ask them, they will say, Mother, we are very unhappy. It's like asking unhappiness to come and decorate you. But it has a subtler meaning of which people are not aware. These are the times when you have to get your realization. This mass realization has to work out, is all prophesied, and very important times are these. All the stars are acting together. The whole universe is helping us. All the elements are helping us. We are on the stage. But when the actors arrive on the stage, they are finished. They can't act. They can't do anything. They can't play their game. They are so.
So we move to the meditation now. Let us go beyond the arc here. Let us go beyond these political problems, these impossibly complicated human problems, for which any argument we might make on one side will be rejected on the other. And so let's go beyond these things into meditation. To be discriminating, but not to be judges. Be instruments of compassion and love, which alone can work out these problems. Knowing we don't do it, but it can be done through us in a way. who are putting our attention in the correct direction, in meditation, compassion. These are terrible problems, and we need to attend to them as witnesses. Compassion in meditation. This is the argument of the world we've been talking about. We ask Lord Jesus to help to open our Adya chakras and the Adya chakras of the good people involved in this intractable situation through the grace of Allah. So I'll ask Pretty to put on the music I've chosen, which I think is very beautiful. But if you like silence, of course, you just mute it, and then we'll go on to about 9. That was Rod Puria, San Francisco, 1991. So to finish with, I'll just read a couple of poems, maybe short ones. And this one is a well-known poem by Greaves. Some people find it a bit corny, but I love it. It's written, I think it was written during or towards the end of or just after the First World War, which Sassoon was a participant in, and he wrote a lot about this in some beautiful books of memoirs, slightly fictionalized and also ones that were directly under his own name. It's called Everyone Sang. So it's about the end of conflict, and it sort of implies something about the realization of spiritual reality beyond the conflict. Everyone suddenly burst out singing, and I was filled with such delight as prisoned birds must find in freedom, winging wildly across the white orchards and dark green fields, on, and out of sight. Everyone's voice was suddenly lifted, and beauty came like the setting sun. My heart was shaken with tears, and horror drifted away. Oh, but everyone was a bird, and the song was wordless. The singing will never be done. And if I can find it, this is one to go to bed with. It's by Hilaire Belloc, who was, what can I say? He was an MP, strangely, but a good poet. This is called The Night. I'd never read this until about 2 minutes ago. So, most holy night, that still dost keep the keys of all the doors of sleep. To me, when my tired eyelids close, give thou repose. And let the far lament of them that chaunt the dead day's requiem make in my ears, who wakeful lie, soft lullaby. Let them guard the horned moon by my bedside, their memories croon. So shall I have new dreams and blessed in my brief rest. Fold thy great wings about my face, hide dawning from my resting place, and cheat me with your false delight, most holy night. I like that. So that's all for tonight, and thank you. Forgive any errors of judgment on my part, and I'll see you shortly in December.